Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to welcome Professor Waqas Khawaja, Professor Atar Tahir, and Mr. Iftikhar back to their alma mater. We are delighted to have them with us today for this conversation. Professor Waqas Khawaja is the Ellen Douglas Leyburn Professor of English at Agnes Scott College, where he teaches post-colonial literature, British Romanticism, narratives of empire, Gothic literature, Victorian poetry and fiction, and creative writing. He holds a PhD in English from Emory University and an LLB from the Punjab University Law College, Lahore. He is the author of 4 collections of poetry, a literary travelogue written during his fellowship at the International Writers Program at the University of Iowa, and the editor of 3 major anthologies of Pakistani literature. He has also served as translation editor for Modern Poetry of Pakistan and has guest edited a special issue on Pakistani literature for the Journal of Commonwealth and Post-Colonial Studies. A recipient of multiple international literary honors, Professor Khwaja remains deeply engaged in his scholarly and social practice.
Mr. Atar Tahir is a Lahore-based English language poet and retired civil servant. Thrice the recipient of the Patras Bukhari Award, the highest national prize for literature in English. He is a poet, essayist, short story writer, translator, and a scholar of Punjabi texts, as well as a calligrapher artist, and art critic, art historian. Mr. Tahir has published over 20 books, including several volumes of poetry and essays, such as A Certain Season and Body Loom. His poems, also translated into Italian, Urdu, and Chinese, have been set as text for secondary schools and for Cambridge O-level syllabus, and have also been included in several OUP anthologies and in Language for a New Century, published by W. Norton and Co. He is the founder-director of the International Center for Pakistani Writing in English at the Curtea College, Lahore. He has been awarded the Tamga-e-Imtiaz in 1998 and the Sitara-e-Imtiaz in 2009 for his services and contribution to literature. We also have with us Mr. Iftikhar, who is an established bureaucrat and renowned alumni of Government College University, Lahore. He belongs to the second common of civil services of Pakistan and has served under Pakistan Customs Service. Mr. Iftikhar, Mr. Atar Tahir, we are honored to have you with us.
We have Mr. Khwaja and we have Mr. Atar Tahir. It must be wonderful coming back home, returning to Government College after all these years. Do you find yourself struck by the transformations the campus has undergone, or by the enduring elements that have remained unchanged? And what do these impressions reveal to you about your own journey?
Well, it's been a while since I came back to campus. The last time I was here must be about 13, 14 years ago, when you had an international conference here. And I had been very graciously invited as a keynote speaker there and spoke on Romanticism and its discontents. And coming back to Government College is very much like a feeling of romantic nostalgia, if you will. And not only that, but obviously things, as you mentioned very rightly, there are things that are enduring, well-chosen word there, and there are things that have changed, that have evolved, that have morphed over the years that have passed, even since then. But my time at Government College was way back in another century, I would say in another millennia actually. Such a long time has passed. So it seems like somebody very ancient coming back to an institution. This was in 1968 to 1971 that I was here. 68 to 70 basically, I think, because I was here for 3 years doing my undergraduate. So we came from senior Cambridge. Atar and I actually started at the same time. We became friends. I suppose it was the very first day that we entered Government College. And it was a fascinating place. It seems just as fascinating today, just, as you enter the gate and you see that Gothic building in front of you. It is very inspirational, to be very honest. And it is as inspirational, it seems to me, so many decades apart from the time when I first saw it to this day. It raises the heart in the same manner. It raises the spirits in the same manner. And then I see people in those maroon coats that I see, the blazers that they wear. And I remember how proud I was when I first wore that blazer. And this building itself, the chemistry building, where we had chemistry classes, because I initially was in the sciences. And I'm so glad that daughter of one of our very revered teachers here, Mr. Ehsan Qureshi, is here as well. And here was a person who had a very big heart, who took us when we were students, when we were very raw, and I was very raw, I still am very raw, but anyway, was very raw and had no idea of how, how to navigate the world. Here was a person who was very tolerant and accommodating of the usual, the little sort of naughtiness that young people are capable of doing or normally get drawn into doing, disturbing the class, talking in the class all the time. And I remember one very interesting incident, and we were addressed, by the way, it was a huge class, 101, 105 students or something. We were addressed by our roll numbers. And I remember an incident where one after the other, there were people in front of me that were being asked to leave the classroom, then the people next to me were being asked to leave the classroom. And then Mr. Ehsan Qureshi stopped his lecture and he looked at me directly and he said, "Oye, 151 ਹੁਣ ਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਬਾਹਰ ਕੱਢ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਹੁਣ ਤੇ ਚੁੱਪ ਕਰ ਜਾ." Passing on to Atar, who was in the same class.
I walked this hallowed path with Waqas many, many years ago. And as we walked up towards the tower, you really felt uplifted. It was a symbol of not only knowledge and wisdom, but also of fraternity, that you made friends who last you a lifetime. And the friendships you make as a student outlive the friendships you might have as a professional if you join a department or if you join the services. Those friendships are all peripheral, but the real friendships are formed in schools and colleges. So for me to have Waqas again here together, because I've been here off and on for various functions, for various launches, book launches, etc. But we've never been together like this. So for me, it is a very special moment to be here with a friend of many decades. And coming back to government college is always a bit of a mixed bag, because although it prompts nostalgia, you also realize that things have moved on. It's not quite the same place. For one, the campus is much greener than I remember. I remember there used to be Indian coral trees. I don't see them now along the oval. And you have this Asoka tree, which is all over the place because it's shadier, it's greener. And then, of course, one remembers the teachers. One was taught by, Waqas has mentioned Mr. Ehsan. When we went I went after FSC, I transferred to the literature class for BA Honours. So we had teachers like Professor Shoaib bin Hassan, a remarkable person, not only as a teacher, but as a writer. I consider him to be one of the finest essay writers in the country. And I rank him anywhere with Hazlitt and all the great British English essays. Unfortunately, he's not taught. I took the initiative when I founded the International Center for Pakistani Writing in English at Curtea College in 2014. It's still going on, alhamdulillah. I included him in the course. And it was remarkable, the reaction and the response we got from the students, because he was talking about not only global things, but also local things. So that global and local, the local aspect was something that resonated with the students. So what we need to do is actually introduce in our English literature courses on Pakistani writing in English. People who have written, like Shoaib bin Hassan. And we have Tawfiq Rafat, who I consider to be the founder of Pakistani English poetry.
We
Zulfikar Ghaus, and absolutely all these people that have made a significant contribution to the growth of Pakistani idiom need to be taught. And even if they do not agree with the idiom, but they are writing about Pakistan, using the Pakistani cadence and language and diction, they should be taught. So for me, coming to government college is always a pleasure, and interacting with students here and learning from them as much as perhaps they can take from us is always something I look forward to.
There's just this, and I first of all would like to apologize because this is the professorial part of mine that kicks in at this time. I do want to correct the name of Zulfikar Ghaus. His name is not Ghaus, it is Ghaus. It was from Ghosh that it became Ghos, G-H-O-S-E, but his original name, if you want to know, is Khwaja Zulfikar Ahmed. From Sialkot, Khwaja Zulfikar Ahmed is his original name. I do want us to make this correction because I've seen some faculty members from other institutions, not at government college, make this mistake. So please be careful about that. Thank you.
How he acquired that name while he was traveling and living in different cities, and then the Ghosh art, and how it helped him navigate the India of that time.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yes, you're right.
Okay, so I've got a question from Dr. Tahir. So I had the pleasure to attend one of your book launches, at the GCO Literary Festival a couple of years ago. So as you mentioned earlier, that we need to perhaps, work on the Pakistani idiom, bring it to the mainstream knowledge. Do you think that your writings have, in the past couple of years, evolved in that direction, or what themes do you feel, you're trying to explore as time goes on, or have they shifted?
Initially, this whole idea of the Pakistani idiom comes from Tawfiq Rafat's seminal essay, which was published by the University of Karachi in the early 60s. He advocated something which Rilke had done. Rilke, the German poet, had already talked about the German idiom vis-a-vis the French and the Russian. So it was nothing new that Tawfiq said, but it was new for this country because we were imitating and aping what the English writers were doing rather than what the Pakistani. So he introduced this whole idea. As for myself, he mentored me. I submitted my poems to him, as indeed did a number of people, including Waqas, I think. And he would suggest, never correct. He would suggest, and he would always use Punjabi. That used to be his advice, because he did not want to compromise the innate creativity and impose his own style of writing. So, yes, initially one did feel that one has to make a conscious effort to imbibe the Pakistani idiom. But on my third book, A Certain Season, I broke away from that because I became certain of my own voice. I understood what he was saying, but I wanted to say it in my way. And so what I call glocal, that means local sensitivity, local things that you look at, but giving them a global significance. Because that basically is what everybody does. If you read Tolstoy's War and Peace, that huge novel, he's considered one of the great novels is considered one of the great novels written. You'll find that 50 pages is propaganda against Napoleon. He's speaking like a Russian because Napoleon invaded Russia. So you cannot really separate this idea of just being global or just being local. Because now, increasingly with technology, there is such an intermeshing of things that nothing is totally global or purely local. We are all in a global world. And that's why after the first 2 or 3 books, my diction and my perception changed. In the last book, which perhaps you came to that launch of the Last Tea, owes a lot to the Japanese form, the tanka and the haiku. So it was exploring various techniques that you begin to discover new areas.
Found that identity, or are we more fragmented?
Before I answer that, I'll just like to tell you that Waqas started a group. The whole idea of that group was to have interlinguistic exchange. So we had poets writing in English, Punjabi and Urdu. And I'll pass it on to him to answer this question.
Well, thank you, Arthur, and thank you for that question also. Yes, it was interlinguistic, and the whole idea was part of the thing that moved me and frustrated me at that time. I had come out of an English speaking and English sort of focused educational system, St. Anthony's High, where we had only one class of Urdu in a week, and the rest of the week we were both speaking in English and writing in English and so on and so forth, and knew very little about our own languages. It was only at government college, so this is another, the alma mater that we talk about, opened up this, this whole new world to me. Of Urdu literature and of other literatures, Punjabi literature. There were people here who were writing Punjabi poetry. By the way, there was this famous French professor, Professor Laik Babri, who was a Punjabi poet and fascinating Punjabi poet. He also translated Baudelaire into English. And published, I think, that book as well at that time while we were here at government college. So yes, this idea that this interaction needs to happen is there. But let me pull back a little bit about the Pakistani idiom and say a little bit on that too. Because yes, I was initially also moved by this idea of the Pakistani idiom. I would say that. But I never thought of it as a conscious sort of objective or a structural principle while I was writing poetry. I never thought of that in those terms. I think it was important to just be yourself or be myself. And as I evolve, and Arthur has very rightly talked about it, as we discover our own voice or close to something that we call our voice or our voices, it also depends, how that happens. That's also an interesting subject that we can talk about for a long time. This idea that you consciously follow a path to be somewhat in a certain vein or in a certain temperament or in a certain sort of sense of temperament, if you will, projecting the culture that you come from, you don't have to do that. You are living it. You're living it and you're imbibing it all your life, one way or the other. And interestingly, whether you read something or not, I'm all for reading, by the way, and as much reading as you can do, the more the better. Actually, there's never going to be enough, by the way, as much as you can do. But you don't really have to do that to have a sensibility that has absorbed the cultural influences, the rituals, the customs, the conventions, the sensibilities of the people that you're living among. You cannot sort of just say that, this will not affect me. I am somebody who's totally living in a vacuum. So discovering that and articulating from that point of view, I think, is important. But where I have come from that position to where I am today is to recognize more that I am just part of a huge ecology that is not only terrestrial but in every way cosmic as well. There are influences all around us and of creatures both living and creatures that we deem not living as well, organic and inorganic matter. And I think I've learned to be so much more respectful of all of that and finding a place that is not above them in any way or below them in any way. But we are all an essential part of that ecology and respecting that. And it seems to me that whether I want to do it intentionally or not becomes irrelevant. The whole being that has evolved to this or morphed to this place expresses itself in this manner. I hope it sort of gets to the question that you had asked. Now, the other part, of course, I can't answer that question about whether you are still meeting together or not. People who are writing, I'm sure they are. I'm pretty certain they are. I hope the interaction with local cultures also continues. I hope familiarity and absorption in local languages also continues. And I hope that we can also, at the same time as we are writing in English, speaking in English, creating in English, we have enough people who are doing innovative and new work in the Punjabi language, in the Sindhi language, in the Pashto language, in all these languages, in the Urdu language, all these languages as well. This is a key part of, again, moving forward in a healthy ecology. It's linguistic ecology as well, if I may say so.
The growth of Adabi festivals, melas, is actually a good prod towards understanding and learning from other languages. Recently, they had the other festival in Karachi, and they honored both Urdu as well as Sindhi poets. And they're planning next year to add Balochi to it. So you do have, with the growth of these literary festivals and across linguistic pollination is taking place. People are beginning to understand and beginning to welcome work that is not in English or Urdu alone. So you do have that thing gradually coming up. But as you all hope, that there are also groups like Waqas created that group in the 60s in Lahore, that there are similar groups in the country that look at the cultures of this country and the languages of this country and the literatures of this country. And so there is creative dialogue between the practitioners of whether it is a novel or whether it's poetry, so that the experience becomes richer. It becomes more comprehensive.
I must acknowledge that this is impressive that you remember or you have picked up that in that group there were people like Ali Arshad Mir and Sai Akhtar. I don't know if even many Punjabi writers would know about both these, right? But perhaps Sai Akhtar, yes, because he was an oral poet and he used to, I think in the more recent past, he's passed away now, but his poetry used to be presented on television and radio and all. Alamiya Thalleya, one of the long poems that he wrote, and then Mere Lahore De Dekh Nazare, in that, and all. When I was practicing law in Pakistan decades ago, in the afternoon, we'd sit together and I'd record some of these things. I still have recordings from that time. Ali Arshad Mir is a much more complex poet and is steeped in Punjabi tradition. He was the principal of Government College, Faisalabad, if I remember correctly. He's also passed away 14, 15 years ago. But I was very gladdened to know that the Punjabi writers, a group of Punjabi writers have gotten together to celebrate a yearly anniversary. They call even an Ursi. They designate him as the Homer of Punjabi. His poetry is worth looking at, and his poetry is very complex, by the way, and modernistic, quite apart from the traditional poetry that one reads in Punjabi, which is great in its own right, but this is a different kind of poetry. And it harkens back to the Mohenjo-daro traditions, etc. So yes, there were Punjabi. Munnu Bhai used to come there as well. I could name other people who would come there, and it's great. But then the Urdu writers, Kishwar Nahid used to come. We had Ashfaq Sahib come and present his work. Ahmad Nadeem Qasmi come and present his work. Javed Shaheen and so on. So a huge cast of writers over the years developed a network where we could also translate work from one language into the other, and not necessarily only from the local languages into English, but vice versa as well. So this work of translation is why I took the mic again, and I wanted to highlight this is also a very key part of moving forward. Translating between different languages is also a form of cross-pollination, but also advances your skills as a writer very much. Thank you.
First of all, it's a pleasure to have you here. Considering we were talking about evolvement and integration, my question is centered around your personal involvement as writers, and basically, how did the Pakistani literaries affair of 1960s and 1970s, particularly the divide between English and vernacular literary traditions, influence the kind of questions you began to ask in your writing, and what did you feel was missing from that landscape? And correlating to that, I have another question. When you began writing seriously, who did you imagine as your reader? Was it a Pakistani literary community, a global audience, or perhaps an ideal reader that didn't exist but you feel exists now? Like, what was the extent to which you imagined your readership?
Whole slew of questions here, a whole lot of questions, all very, very profound questions, by the way. And I think questions that we engage with continually. And if you're expecting a definitive or an authoritative answer, please sort of move back from that, because you're not going to get one. It is a struggle and it's a journey that we all go through, and even at this age, I am going through it as well. So I can give you certain markers regarding that. Yes, it was initially, because I was sort of exposed to a lot of English poetry in school, it was initially the English poets that moved me a whole lot. There was Browning, there was Wordsworth, there was Shelley, there was Keats, all these Auden, all these figures. But again, that was just the start of it all. And again, it was only coming to government college that I became aware of a larger cast of poets in other languages as well. That is not to say that I was never introduced to Momin or Momin's writing, or Ghalib or Zauq, etc. at school, but it was a one, short anthology, Jawahar Pare, I think is what it was called. And it would hardly give you an idea of what, really this poetic landscape and tradition was in depth. So it was a learning process there as well. But it is important to keep in mind that from the very beginning, at least, I seemed very much grounded in my own environment. It couldn't be possible that I was writing in some airy-fairy world about abstract things or theoretical things that had nothing to do with reality just because I was writing in English. It didn't matter. Yeah, I'm writing in English, all right, but I am writing about subjects and topics that are meaningful to me, that matter somehow or the other to me. So that is the key factor that has continued since that time. I'm not writing about or to someone out there. I'm writing about something that I want an explanation of from myself. So it is a plumbing inside, if you would, wanting to figure out, where am I going with all of this? What is this teaching me, rather than how can I control my poem? If I can make that difference. Where is this language leading me? Where is this journey leading me? And if I know where the poem is leading me from the very beginning, the reader will of course know it as well, and it's going to be a very boring poem, I'm sorry to say that. Because the surprise that comes with it, the surprise that the poem brings with it, the surprise that the creative process itself springs on me suddenly, that is what ignites the poem. That is what makes the poem what it is, not just repeating age-old images and metaphors and so on and so forth. So that's the sort of kind of evolution that we are talking about. As we go along, the journey continues, and one continues to try and plumb as much as one can into this sphere. But then your horizon widens further, becoming acquainted with French poetry, Portuguese poetry, German poetry, and so on, Italian poetry, Persian poetry. Actually coming back to Persian poetry and finding the richness of it. Strangely coming back to Persian poetry through translations into English, and being so moved that you want to learn Persian all over again, and then going back to Persian. You see what I'm saying? So the field of knowledge is so huge, so vast, it will not end. And so this journey continues nonetheless in that sense as well. And respect for people everywhere, not the fact that, okay, I'm embedded only in this one culture now. Call it whatever culture you like. Call it the subcontinental culture, Indian culture, Pakistani culture, Muslim culture, Hindu culture, Buddhist culture, Jain culture. Call it a Persian culture, Western culture, again, a huge area, Oriental culture, huge area, Arabic. Go on and on with it. You see what I'm trying to say. This is all a part of our heritage. And one of the crucial things that I realized very early, I feel almost abashed that I'm going to give an example from one of the anthologies that I did early. It's called Mornings in the Wilderness. for which I wrote a short introduction. Some of the things that I've grown out of by this time, but some I adhere to. One of the things I mentioned there was that our subcontinent, if you look at it, with all its history of the many interventions, people may call invasions or intersections that have happened here from all across the world, Western world, Central Asian world, Middle Eastern world, you call it, African, all these threads are everywhere. This must be the richest cultural sort of inheritance that anyone has. And instead of embracing it, if we say, oh, now that we have lines of division in this form, or we grew up in a certain atmosphere, we only belong to this particular ethnicity or this particular culture or this particular language or this particular tradition or history or part of history, I think is severely limiting oneself, and you don't want to do that. And so that's the sort of response, a very sort of amorphous one.
I'll just like to add to what Waqas has said, that your questions actually ask a more fundamental question. They ask, why do I write? Why do I create? You create and write because you have to do it. It's something that overpowers you and obliges you to do. If you don't have that feeling, that urge, that welling up of that particular thought, you don't need to. It's only when something moves you or something obsesses you or something overwhelms you that you begin to want to translate it into something the words can carry, the ideas that you believe in. If you think in English, naturally you will write in English. And then you begin to play around with it. There are difficult forms that you tackle, there are difficult emotions that you have to handle. But that's the delight of creation. That is what ultimately is so satisfying. That here is a challenge you've set yourself. Nobody else has set the challenge to you or set it for you. You do it yourself. And then you see how you can, in poetry, of course, in the least possible words, convey as much as the words can carry. And then leave a lot unsaid, which can still be perceived. You see? So you have to answer that question for yourself. Is the urge strong enough for you to do what you want to do? If it's not, don't waste your time. Do something else. But if it does, then you have a lifetime of struggle with whatever genre you're working in. So that's it. It's an individual effort. Everybody has to do it for himself or herself. And it's an individual endeavor to achieve what you wish to achieve. So you set your standards, you set your rules. Nobody else can do it for you. What you can do is, when you read good poetry or good poets, is that they can tell you how to do it, but they can't tell you what to do. That is your choice.
When Pakistani writers are read in the West, do you feel there is a pressure to perform trauma, otherness, or religion in order to be legible or taken seriously? And how do you deal with that performative?
Again, I think another great question, and another question that has all kinds of sort of conflicted responses. I would say conflicted responses to it. On the one hand, it seems that there are audiences out there, and one of the questions that you raised was, what kind of an audience do you write for? One wonders if one ever writes for an audience, in that sense, a particular kind of an audience, but of the audience of somebody that is inside you, rather than, it's a theoretical construct. So there's a lot of pressures there, or demand also. Tell us about your narratives and all the horrors that you're going through out there, and see, that you have the freedom to express them here. First of all, that's puerile, it's childish. It is also the fact that somehow that society thrives on listening to narratives of horror, Gothic narratives from other countries, and prides itself on something it does not itself. It's very hypocritical. It does not have. But when you use the word trauma, when you use the word of abuse, suffering, exploitation, rigor of some kind, or something rubbing you the wrong way, frankly, we all go through that. No matter where we are living, we all go through that. I mean, do you think that people today living in the United States are not going through it? Or talk about this, first of all, to the African Americans, and they'll tell you. Talk about the native original populations of that place, they'll tell you. Talk about the horror of somebody taking on another person's land and then saying, all right, now other people can't come into this land because we have taken it. You're seeing that repeated in other parts of the world as well. You are seeing the horrors and the massacres repeated in other parts of the world. So that's why I say it's a conflicted response. You can't get away from the horrors. You can't get away from the genocides, the massacres, the slaughters, etc. And yet you're not writing about them because you're going to appease a certain audience, or you want to please a certain audience, or you want to get certain awards. And though it does seem sometimes that, when these decisions are taken, this is how it happens. And I think that's why I have my reservations about the award culture. I have my reservations about these book festivals, etc. It's like you pat my back, I pat your back. Why? Because we are doing the same kind of thing. Isn't this great that we are doing it? I am in an entirely other sphere. Maybe nobody reads my work or should, or it doesn't matter to me. It really doesn't. Am I able to understand what I think the fundamental question that Atar raised also? And it's why am I writing? Who am I addressing? I'm trying to understand myself. I'm a very clumsy person. I'm not fluent with words. You ask me a question, I'm fumbling to give you an answer. Well, I'll sit down, I'll work it out on the paper, and I don't know. I don't know myself what the answer is. And maybe 10 days later or 3 months later, I will find a tentative resting place, maybe not a permanent answer. And I'll present that, and it seems like this may be it. And maybe the next day I say, no, this isn't quite it. I still want to go further. This is what art is, by the way. See, the person you're trying to satisfy will never be satisfied. It's in there. You're trying to understand that person. It's not only in one person or the other that complexity exists, or that trauma exists, or that sense of injury exists, or that sense of elation or elixir exists, whatever. It exists in all of us. It's a question of whether we do have the time to plumb that. And once again, I endorse what Atar rightly said. If you have the urge to express that, then it's a lifetime activity. Then forget about everything else. You're going to be doing this. This is a never-ending quest, and you might find the resting places. Like, he's found resting places 20 times or something. These are his books, let's say. I'm just saying, just as a metaphor. Resting places. It's not the end. As far as he's concerned, it's still going. And so this is with, I think, all creative artists. This is how it goes on. It makes us just more tolerant of ourselves as well as of others. I think that is the important thing that I have learned through this. It makes you a person that recognizes that we cannot just dismiss another person as, oh, this is an evil person, and this is a good person, and there's much more going on there. And one needs to sort of get much more absorbed in this. And how far are you willing to go there? And how far are you willing to admit that your own implication somehow may be there as well? Even in the question that you asked, the fact that, oh, I write and somebody up there picks it up. There is an implication that I've become part of a system that, whether I liked it or not, I've become a part of it. I've been sort of drawn into it. Am I willing to be satisfied with that and say, oh, I got this, this is great. So that is never going to happen, if it is. I don't know if I've really confused the issue hugely or whatever. But
given the current institutional and critical positioning of Pakistani literature in English, do you think the development of sustained indigenous critical frameworks has been relatively marginalized. Please note that this question is simultaneously a cry for help and a viable direction we should be taking.
Again, from the label, which I hate, post-colonial tradition, right? It is easy to use a label which denies other labels, right? But it is creating a new label. And once we create a label, then we try to define that label, and we try to fall into that category. And then, of course, that label is not enough because that doesn't define everything. And life is much more complex. So what do we do next? We create yet another label. So transnational, can we find something else? We'll go on doing this. But is it fruitful to do that? And as I said, I shy away from all those labels, those names that say this voice is this kind of a voice, or this kind of a literature, or that kind of a literature, especially when we are in this fumbling, stumbling sort of journey, all of us together on this planet. It's not that only we here are going through it, people elsewhere are going through it. And yet, as you talked about indigeneity, there is something there that is valuable that I'm not willing to give up, that we are, each one of us in their own way is not willing to give up. And what is that we are not willing to give up is the big question. We cannot say, okay, all that colonization that has occurred, all of the interventions that have occurred, let's reverse them and create the originary situation. Will we be satisfied with that situation? Of course we will not be satisfied with that situation. There's much inequity in all society, many inequities in all societies. So how do we go past those inequities is one question that may be relevant to us or not relevant to us. But is there all learning also, or is all learning confined only to a particular religion or to a particular sort of region or to a particular people? There are plenty of people in the world that are trying to claim that, by the way. There will be people in the West claiming in a certain way. There are people right across the border claiming in a certain way. Plastic surgery actually occurred with in the early sort of stories that are told in the Mahabharata, etc. You can go on with that, and so on. The Muslims will claim everything that in learning is being was actually originated by the Muslims. You can go on with that, on and on with that. So the fact that these intersections have occurred, and these have comprised and composed the kind of culture that we live in, which is already hybridized, to recognize that is the first thing, and then to have the choice to see what I value in my own culture that I need to sponsor, that I need to nurture, that I need to work towards sort of maybe helping it bloom, flower. And what is it that I don't find appropriate? What I can learn from others as well. And other cultures have plenty to learn from us as well. That sense of give and take, the fact that we are all participants in this, is far more important than this idea of maintaining, let us maintain our indigeneity, wear a certain kind of clothes, or talk in a certain kind of language, or write about certain themes, and not about the others, etc. I think that again is very constricting. That again leads to what I would say a kind of a separation, division between people. And I would want to move beyond that. I may be totally wrong. This may be quixotic, and of course it probably is. It's like the Sheikh Chili talking about this. I want to dream of a world, a space where we can all flourish together in our sort of diversities, in our variations, in our differentials, in all that we have to offer separately, collectively, within communities too, and so on. But that's about as far as I would go in this.
As a creative writer, one is committed to words. One is committed to how you use those words and how you place them alongside each other. The problem is that a lot of the jargon that is used, or labels that are used, or names that are given, have their own biases, have their own baggage. And the situation here in the world now is a matter of semantics, how you interpret a certain word. There's a very famous essay by George Orwell, which was basically a radio broadcast during the Second World War, in which he mentions this. For example, if you look at the recent genocide in Gaza, or you look at what happened to people across the world, wherever there are conflicts, there is a certain language that the mainstream media uses. They don't say so many women and children died. They said so many casualties took place. Now, casualty is an abstract word. It's not pinned down. It doesn't have the same response which when you say a child or a woman or an old man is killed or bombed or liberated. The same thing happens with language, that when you start using words without going into a certain amount of depth, you are perpetuating that word, you're perpetuating that phrase, you're perpetuating that label. I'll give you a simple example. There's a very famous book called Hobson Jobson. It is all the Indian words which were used by the British, which are now part of the OED, Oxford English Dictionary, or have become obsolete. It gives you all that. Hobson Jobson was actually an imperialist way of rendering Ya Hussain, Ya Hussain. So this person saw this procession, Shia procession moving, and he couldn't understand what they were saying, and he said Hobson Jobson. That's what they're saying. Now, that document itself reflects the whole imperial baggage which words carried during the colonial period. If you look at a simple example is Delhi, ya Delhi. It is not Delhi. It is Delhi, ya Delhi. But when you write it in English, it's Delhi. And nobody fights back. You just accept words. Similarly, if you look at Islam and Muslim, there's a longish work, essay that I'm writing, is that things can be Islamic, but they need not be Muslim. And things can be Muslim, and they need not be Islamic. And yet, if you look at all the Orientalists or Islamic scholars, they have used this word without thinking. They have used Islam in place of Muslim, Muslim instead of Islam. So what is happening here is that even the words, when they are being used by us, have to be questioned. You have to come back to a certain Shara-e-Qaid-e-Azam. Shara, when you write it in English, dash, E, dash, Qaid-e-Azam. But literally it should be Shara, dash, I, no space, Qaid-e-Azam. Again, Qaid-e-Azam should not be with an E, it should be dash I. If you are going to look at it on a literal, transliterative fashion, you have to make those corrections. But nobody does. So when you go and write a certain poem or a short story or a novel or whatever, you should be conscious of the words, because those words are carrying your emotion. And if those words are not properly handled, they can lead astray.
It seems that it is a reference to Yeats's poem, The Second Coming. And at the same time, I read somewhere that you're also planning to publish another novel that is called Tomorrow, Tomorrow and Tomorrow, which is a reference to Macbeth from Shakespeare. So if we need to fight back, how do we incorporate these references to European classics in our written works while we're reclaiming space? Can we reclaim them for our own in some way?
You see, the thing is, when you read in different languages or from different languages, you imbibe certain ideas and things. So although you are trying to express what you feel, you're at the same time setting out ripples into other literatures. Now, the last collection, The Last Tea, had references to not only the Last Tea, the ceremony itself, Japanese ceremony, but also to the Last Supper. It was embedded in it. But I didn't have to say it. A person who's had enough of a reading in cross-cultural literature would understand why last tea. Because there a friend betrays Jesus, here a friend betrays Jesus, the master. So it's when different cultures, and you see, this is something very funny which somebody mentioned. He said, you have written in English about a Japanese ritual, and you are Pakistani. And in that you have embedded Western ideas. But that's what life is all about. That's what Waqas is talking about, that when you read different literatures, you get something from them. You begin to understand your own self better because you're looking at it from different perspectives.
A considerable amount of literature as well. Now, as we know that law, like literature, relies heavily on narrative, interpretation, and persuasion. So I was wondering how your legal background has...
I think literature may provide the only venue where you may find historical justice restored, redressed in some way or the other. And I can work my way backwards from there. Because legal justice, the laws that are promulgated, that are operative in a state, are part of a system. And that system is always privileging a certain part of that society, is always privileging a certain kind of thinking. To give you an example, when there is an intervening or let's say an invasion from outside in a country and a new dispensation is established, anyone who cooperates with that new dispensation becomes absorbed in that dispensation and would be considered as part of what is right, what is appropriate, what is legally permissible, what is legally acceptable as well. And people who do not choose to collaborate or cooperate with the new invasionary force, colonizing force, call it whatever you will, are the rebels, are the criminals, are the ones who are troublemakers, and so on, and in the eyes of law need to be punished or controlled in some way. Languages are erased by just establishing one language as the central language of a society. By saying, everyone speaks in this language, your education will be in this language, and this is all that will get you the jobs that are available, the privileged jobs that are available, not by speaking your own private language, whatever that language is, or communal language, whatever that language is. Again, systemic sort of exclusion is what we find. So historical wrongs may be talked about in history books. Various historians can make various sort of assessments about them. But as I said earlier, it is literature, it is the field of literature, it's the space that literature provides, whether it is, you can call it art as well, painting as well does it. You can do that in music too. It's abstract, but you can do it in music too. It has been done, it can be done. The famous painting of Picasso, for instance, is an example that one can give, but there are many others. So what I'm saying here is that part, if you are expecting law to redress this, the quest is laudable, but let's not hope too much. Let's not put too much hope in it. We have to change a lot before that can happen, which means we have to change the system. As we were talking around, we found out how difficult it is actually to change the system, to overthrow the yoke that has been placed on a people. You can only do it bit by bit, but it doesn't work bit by bit. So as I think Audre Lorde it was, that said that you can't fight the master with the master's tools, So if you're going to do that, then you have to do it with your own tools. On the one hand, we are very proud of the languages that we have, the cultures that we have. On the other hand, we are not willing to starve for them. We want a job. We want privilege. We want power in society. So you reconcile yourself. How are you going to sort of manage to go past that calculus? That is differential calculus. How do you do that? It is the question. Legal studies did help me a whole lot, but philosophy did in the same way as well. The most important subject that appealed to me in legal studies was jurisprudence, because it not only sort of exposed me to a variety of legal perspectives, legal theories about law, natural law, common law, statutory law, and so on. So it also introduced me to this idea of rigorous logic, reasoning, interpretations, words, but the connotations of those words as well. And so we have to choose very circumspectly. Language doesn't sort of so easily sit on the page. It seems to be moving because of its connotative effects in all different directions at the same time. So there is that. So yes, law did help me a whole lot. I was very grateful that I had the opportunity to study law. The practice of law is quite another thing. And one would have believed that the practice of law would be as ruthless, as self-serving. It's a profession, whoever comes to you have to sort of go and argue their case in the court of law. Yes, within the confines of law, but that's what it is. It allows for a lot of it doesn't allow for, I should say that, let me rephrase that. It constrains a lot of murmurings that you might have, ethical murmurings, moral murmurings that you might have about an issue when you go to a court of law and you have to serve the interest of a client. It's not always that you are getting that client your right or their right. Often it is a question of balancing, between two parties, and you're speaking for a party as if that is the only party that is on the right. Literature, of course, allows you to move between all parties. Compassion, perhaps a kind of a universal, comprehensive compassion for all the characters that are created or positions that are created, is perhaps one of the cardinal sort of features of good literature. You cannot say, I will make the evil character evil in every way so that, you hate that character and there'll be no good characters. If there's no such character ever that existed in the world, you have to make that character credible as well and have empathy with that character, to that character be a worthy antagonist. Otherwise, that will not happen. So that's my 2 cents on this.
Institutional space is governed by procedure, hierarchy, and administrative structure, but structure in general, because that is what you're going to build on. Now, structure is something that also reflects in your work, Telling Twilight, which is a collection of about 140 sonnets, right? So, how much of this structure in this sonnet is because of a structured lifestyle you've lived, if any at all? And also, obviously, you've produced other work where you've experimented with fragmental poetry and those kind of stuff. What do you think the sonnet structure allows a poet to do intellectually or emotionally that freer forms might not?
It's a very simple answer to that. Can a tree stand vertical if it did not have the structure of its trunk and branches? Think about it. You see, what administrative services, the civil service of Pakistan, now called the Pakistan Administrative Service, teaches you is a number of things. The theory in the colleges, in the National University of Public Administration, NIPA, and other courses that you do. But the practice is very different. My own experience is that it's like a cutthroat den of people who are in power. Either you are with them or you are against them. Very few people are able to negotiate the crack between the two. It is a service which demands obedience at one level. You may suggest what you want, but ultimately the decision itself is out of your hands. Your advice, your recommendation might be very honest, but if it does not suit the powers that are, it will be neglected. There is a great deal of structure within that, but that structure is often misused. I was telling Waqas that because one didn't follow a certain pattern of behavior, I was in grade 21 for 7 years. Why? Because I did not conform. People say, usko pakdo, usko safarish karo, usko. I said, no, nothing doing. I'm top of my batch. Why should I ask anybody? Isn't merit something that should be considered? No, it isn't, after a certain level. So some of you are thinking of going into the civil service. Remember that 17 and 18 you have to work hard, 19 you start networking, and from 20, 21, 22 it's all networking. There's no merit. I'm being very frank and honest about it. But as far as creativity is concerned, I always believe that there should be a structure. Because if you do not have a structure, you're not able to say the thing you want to say in the best possible way. The structure provides that network of emotions or network of words which reflects what you want to say. So even if you look at so-called free verse itself has a structure. You see? So it depends on how you perceive structure. Do you perceive it as an impediment, or do you see it as a facilitator of expression? But you have to have a structure. Without structure, you can have nothing. This cosmos is a structure. I was remembering in the 60s, or was it 70s, there was a very famous series on the BBC called Cosmos by Carl Sagan, Sagan. And I remember when I first saw that, because he talked about the entire universe and trillions of light years away, there are other galaxies. You begin to see that you are just a small mote in the dust, as he put it. But there is a structure within the earth, and there is a structure or principles of structure that are operative outside the world. So for me, it's very important. But it depends on how one looks at it. It depends on my own perception of what structure should be. One, of course, is the sonnet form. It is a rigorous thing. You want to say something, but you are facing the second challenge of the limit of the rhyme scheme, decasyllabic, 10 syllables, 14 lines. Now, you got to girdle up and see if you can handle that. You see, and there are lots of sonnets which I just discard because I don't think I'm coming across. You are the final judge. You have to decide what your merit is. You know other people's merit, but ultimately you have to decide whether the structure is going to facilitate you or it's going to be an impediment. And if it's going to be an impediment, how are you going to handle it? Structure is very important. To stay up straight, you have to have roots, you have to have branches. And I just want to correct the gentleman's observation. Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow is a quartet, is a series of 4 novels, linked but independent. So the first 2 novels the first and the last have been published, working on the second and the third. They will together form the Tomorrow and Tomorrow quartet. Because as you know, the famous lines by Macbeth, it sums it up, what life is all about. A little pessimistic perhaps, but having seen the world as it is, one can empathize with what Macbeth was saying towards the end of his life.
You write in a genre which, in Pakistan we do have now. But then I miss your writings and other people's writings in drama, theatre. We don't have a lot of writings from Pakistani people in this particular genre. So my request to you is that please do write in this particular form as well.
just wonderful to be able to listen to you talk about your work and the work of your contemporaries. My two takeaways from today's discussion, Atar Tahir Sahib, you started off by talking about the importance of glocal, the word global and local. I think that is, a dimension or a direction that we must, kind of take forward. And with respect to Waqas Khawaja Sahib, sir, you have talked about your poetry or your endeavor to write poetry as a kind of a resting place. I quite like this metaphor because I feel that it is sort of indicates what you said, it's a stumbling, fumbling endeavor, kind of is processual and it's ongoing. So I think it's very dynamic. I think that particular metaphor will stay with me as, we kind of move forward with our journeys as far as Pakistani writing in English is concerned. So very grateful and very honored. Thank you very much indeed.